It's time to write that into the Constitution. And as far as the fact that it doesn't say, it doesn't define sex, I would say to the senator from Chesapeake, it didn't define it in the 19th Amendment. There hasn't been any problems with that. In the 13th Amendment, when they, I think it was race, color, creed, national origin, they didn't define that. Everybody knew what it meant, and there were no problems. And to those who think that this is going to turn the military upside down, let me just back up a little. I remember hearing the same. I was only 8 years old, but I remember hearing the same arguments when Harry Truman, President Truman, integrated the military. Okay? How this was going to be disruptive. Things would never be the same. Well, guess what? The African Americans, darn good fighters. They're Medal of Honor winners in Korea, in Vietnam, distinguished themselves just fabulously. There wasn't any of the problems that were predicted. And as for the argument about the churches, the U.S. Supreme Court and the courts have always honored those traditions that are within the church themselves. Okay? That's not going to change by this amendment. And with respect to the military, they're not going to have to take more women if simply because of the 28th, if we add this, 28th Amendment. Having the right stuff has been the sole determinant as to whether you can qualify as a U.S. Army Ranger or as a Navy SEAL. I think to date, one woman, there may be two now, have gone through the U.S. Army Ranger training. Guess what? They disqualify men if they don't have the right physical stuff. That's not going to change. Either you have that upper body strength or you don't. And to sit there and say that somehow or other they're going to have to overlook all of this is, as I said before, is sheer nonsense. After 240 years, it is time to put women into the Constitution in this country. They shouldn't have to go, hat in hand to all the courts all over the country on these discrimination cases. It ought to be, as I said, written into that document. And that's going to happen if we pass it here and down the hall. So I would hope that we would, start the history-making process by voting for the Equal Rights Amendment. Women have come a long way in our society, but 3 or 4 years ago, there was a lawsuit in court. I think it was Walmart. Had 40 regional general managers around the globe, only 3 were women. And guess what? They didn't earn what the male general managers earned. That's correct. I think it finally was settled out of court. But that shouldn't happen. And, people who are making these decisions ought to be conscious of this. I don't think it's too much to ask. They ought to be conscious of this. So I would hope we do what I believe is the right thing. I know that it's controversial within a lot, but I've heard all these arguments before dealing with various civil rights issues, and none of it's ever come to pass. So it's time we do the right thing here today and pass the Equal Rights